I didn't catch her cheating by accident, I caught her because I finally started paying attention to myself. That's the irony of my story. For years, I'd been drifting through my own life like a passenger rather than the pilot I actually was. Always charting courses for others, never plotting my own journey. But sometimes, turbulence serves a purpose. It wakes you up. My name is Aaron Malik. I'm 37 years old, and until recently, I thought I had mastered the art of a stable life. I fly commercial airliners for a living, mostly international routes, the kind where you cross so many time zones that your body forgets what day it is. But I never forgot what mattered: routine, reliability, safety. The fundamentals. That morning in April started like any other. I was home between flights, enjoying a rare stretch of 3 consecutive days in my own bed. The Boston apartment Nadine and I shared was quiet, bathed in that peculiar early spring light that makes everything seem more fragile than it actually is. Nadine was still asleep. My wife of 8 years had always been a late riser, something I'd grown to envy given my pre-dawn flight schedules. I moved quietly through our bedroom, watching her breathe, her dark hair spilling across my pillow. She looked peaceful, innocent. I remember thinking how lucky I was. Funny how memory plays tricks on you. I headed to the kitchen to make coffee, mentally preparing for my next rotation: Boston to London, 3-day layover, then London to Dubai. The routine was comforting, checking the weather patterns across the Atlantic, reviewing crew assignments, calculating flight times. My mind was already airborne while my feet were still planted on our kitchen tile. "You're making that face again," Nadine said, appearing in the doorway wrapped in her robe. Her voice still carried traces of sleep, but her eyes were alert, studying me. "What face?" I asked, pouring her a cup of coffee, 2 sugars, splash of cream, exactly how she liked it. "The one where you're already gone even though you're standing right here." She accepted the coffee but didn't drink it immediately. "You've been home for less than 12 hours, and I can already see you mentally packing." I smiled, kissed her forehead. "Force of habit. I'll be present today, I promise." She nodded, but something in her expression seemed doubtful, resigned. "I didn't register it then." "That's the thing about patterns, they're so familiar you stop seeing them." "I was thinking we could go out tonight," I suggested. "That new place on Newberry Street you mentioned?" Nadine's face brightened, but only slightly. "Actually, I have plans with Jess this weekend. Girls' trip to her lake house, remember? I told you last month." I didn't remember. But that wasn't unusual. My calendar was meticulously organized for work but embarrassingly empty when it came to personal commitments. Another oversight in a long line of them. "Right, of course," I said. "When do you leave?" "This afternoon. I'll be back Sunday night." She sipped her coffee, watching me over the rim of her mug. "Unless you need me to stay?" "I know your time home is limited." There was something in her tone, a challenge, maybe, or a test. But I was still operating on autopilot. "No, no. You should go. Have fun with Jess." Nadine's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Was it relief?" "Thanks. I've been looking forward to it. Need to clear my head." Later, as she packed, I noticed new clothes laid out on our bed: hiking boots, a wide-brimmed hat, sundresses I didn't recognize. Since when did trips to Jess's lake house require so much new gear? "Taking up hiking?" I asked, aiming for casual interest. Nadine folded a dress into her weekend bag. "Jess is into outdoor stuff now. Says it's therapeutic." I nodded, watching her hands move with practiced efficiency. 8 years of marriage, and sometimes I felt I was still getting to know her. Or maybe she was still becoming someone new, someone I hadn't met yet. "I'll miss you," I said, reaching for her hand. She squeezed mine briefly. "Will you? Or will you be too busy flying to notice I'm gone?" There was no malice in her voice, just a sad certainty that stung more than anger would have. Before I could respond, her phone chimed. She glanced at it, and something changed in her expression, a quickening, a light I hadn't seen directed at me in months. "Jess," she explained, texting back rapidly. finalizing details. I wanted to ask more, to bridge whatever invisible gap had formed between us, but the moment passed. Soon she was kissing me goodbye, wheeling her suitcase to the door, promising to text when she arrived. The apartment fell silent after she left. I wandered through the rooms, noticing for the first time how few traces of me existed in our shared space. The decor was all Nadine artwork she'd chosen, furniture we'd picked together, but that reflected her taste more than mine. Even the refrigerator held mostly her preferred foods. I'd been so busy accommodating her preferences that I'd forgotten to maintain my own. That evening, I decided to do laundry, a task Nadine usually handled during my absences. As I sorted through clothes, I found one of my shirts mixed in with her things. What caught my attention was the paper that fell from the pocket when I shook it out, a glossy brochure, folded and refolded many times. Horizon Vineyards, the cover read, Napa Valley's Hidden Gem. The brochure featured images of sun-drenched vineyards, rustic buildings, and smiling people raising wine glasses. It wasn't something I would have picked up. Nadine and I weren't wine people, she preferred cocktails, and I rarely drank due to flight regulations. I was about to toss it aside when I noticed handwriting on the back. In an unfamiliar script, someone had written, "Savor what you deserve." Something cold settled in my stomach. I sat on the edge of the bed, turning the brochure over in my hands. It could be innocent, a random promotional item, perhaps handed out at some event Nadine had attended. But the handwritten note felt intentional, intimate. And why was it in my shirt pocket? I hadn't been to California in months, and certainly not to any wineries. I pulled out my phone and searched for Horizon Vineyards. The website appeared instantly, a boutique winery offering exclusive tours and tastings. The owner, featured prominently on the homepage, was a rugged-looking man named Sebastian Rhodes. Former firefighter, the bio stated, who had discovered his passion for winemaking after a career-ending injury. He looked confident, weathered in an appealing way, with the kind of smile that suggested he was used to people paying attention when he spoke. I scrolled through photos of the vineyard, pausing on one that showed Rhodes leading a small tour group. There were no familiar faces, but something about the casual intimacy of the setting made me uneasy. My phone buzzed with a text from Nadine, "Arrived at the lake. Weather's perfect. Miss you." I stared at the message, then back at the brochure. A thought formed that I didn't want to acknowledge. But once it took shape, I couldn't unthink it. What if Nadine wasn't at a lake house with Jess? What if she was in California, at this vineyard? I texted back, "Glad you arrived safely. Enjoy the lake. Love you." Then I opened my laptop and checked our shared credit card statements. There it was, a flight booked to San Francisco 3 weeks ago for this weekend. Not Boston, to some nearby lake. My training as a pilot kicked in, assess the situation, gather data, don't jump to conclusions. There could be an explanation. Maybe the lake house plan had changed. Maybe she was surprising me with a trip to Napa for our upcoming anniversary. But deep down, I knew. The distance between us hadn't happened overnight. It had grown gradually, like clouds building before a storm. I just hadn't wanted to check the radar. I spent the rest of the evening in a strange, detached state, methodically reviewing our recent history. Nadine's new interest in wine. Weekend trips I'd assumed were with friends. Her growing detachment whenever I was home. The way she'd changed her passwords on her devices, for privacy, she'd said. All these signs I'd attributed to normal marital evolution, to her developing new interests while I was away. But viewed together, they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I used my airline benefits to book a last-minute flight to San Francisco for the following morning. I told myself I just needed to know, to confirm my suspicions were unfounded. But a part of me already understood that I was flying toward a truth that would change everything. As the plane lifted off, carrying me toward California and whatever awaited me there, I realized something that should have been obvious long ago. I had spent years navigating complex flight paths across the globe, reading weather systems and planning for contingencies, but I had failed to chart the changing currents in my own marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me. A pilot who had lost his bearings in his own life. By the time we reached cruising altitude, I had made a decision. Whatever I discovered in Napa, whether my fears were confirmed or dispelled, I wouldn't react immediately. I would observe, gather information, and most importantly, I would finally start paying attention to the signals I'd been ignoring for too long. Not just the signals from Nadine, but from myself. As we soared above the clouds, I felt something unexpected, a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. There was fear there, certainly, and anger beginning to simmer beneath the surface. But there was also a strange, almost liberating feeling of awakening, as if I were emerging from a fog I hadn't even realized had enveloped me. The plane banked west, toward California, toward Nadine, toward whatever truth awaited me at Horizon Vineyards. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't just following a preordained flight plan. I was truly flying. The rental car hummed beneath me as I navigated the winding roads of Napa Valley. The landscape scrolled by in a blur of vineyards and sunlight, but my mind remained fixed on the task ahead. After landing in San Francisco, I had immediately secured the vehicle and programmed the navigation system with Horizon Vineyards' address. According to their website, they offered afternoon tours at 2 and 4, which gave me plenty of time to arrive and observe without being noticed. My hands gripped the steering wheel with unnecessary force as I considered what I might find. The rational part of my brain still clung to alternative explanations. Perhaps Nadine was planning a surprise, or maybe the brochure belonged to someone else entirely. Yet the evidence pointed toward a conclusion I wasn't ready to accept. The flight to California instead of the supposed lake house. The newfound interest in wine. The emotional distance that had been growing between us for months. Horizon Vineyards appeared around a bend in the road, announced by an elegant wooden sign adorned with grapevines. The property stretched across rolling hills, with neat rows of grapevines extending toward the horizon. Under different circumstances, I might have appreciated its beauty. Today, it filled me with dread. I parked at a distance from the main building, a rustic structure with stone walls and large windows that reflected the afternoon sun. Tour groups gathered near the entrance, their laughter carrying across the lot. I remained in my car, scanning faces, searching for Nadine. After 20 minutes of waiting, my patience was rewarded, or perhaps punished, when I spotted her emerging from the building. She wore a sundress I didn't recognize, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way she rarely styled it at home. But what struck me most was her expression, animated, radiant with a joy I hadn't seen in years. The reason for that joy became immediately apparent when a man joined her, placing his hand at the small of her back with casual intimacy. Even from a distance, I recognized him as Sebastian Rhodes, the winery owner whose photo I had seen online. He leaned close to Nadine, saying something that made her laugh, her head tilting back in genuine amusement. They moved together with the comfortable synchronicity of people accustomed to each other's presence, their bodies angled toward one another as if pulled by magnetic force. I watched as they walked among the vines, stopping occasionally while Rhodes gestured at the landscape, presumably explaining some aspect of winemaking. Nadine listened with rapt attention, her hand occasionally touching his arm for emphasis. There was no mistaking the nature of their relationship, the lingering glances, the unnecessary touches, the private smiles. This was not a casual acquaintance or an innocent friendship. My breath caught in my throat as Rhodes reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind Nadine's ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. She leaned into his touch without hesitation, without the slightest indication that she belonged to someone else. That she belonged with me. The reality of what I was witnessing crashed over me with physical force. I gripped the steering wheel to steady myself, my wedding ring catching the sunlight in a cruel reminder of promises made and apparently broken. The anger I had anticipated didn't materialize. Instead, a profound numbness spread through me, as if my emotions had shut down in self-defense. I continued watching as they rejoined a small tour group, maintaining a pretense of formality while exchanging secret glances. Rhodes performed his role as tour guide with charismatic expertise, but his attention repeatedly returned to Nadine, who responded with subtle signals of her own. They thought themselves unobserved, secure in their private language of desire and deception. When the tour concluded, I watched Rhodes discreetly pass Nadine a key. She nodded, her fingers brushing his longer than necessary. They separated, Nadine heading toward the parking area while Rhodes returned to the main building. I ducked down as she passed near my rental car, my heart pounding against my ribs. Once she had driven away, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I would return tomorrow, not to confront them, but to gather more information. That evening, from my anonymous hotel room, I received a text from Nadine: "Beautiful sunset over the lake tonight. Wish you could see it." Attached was a photo of a sunset, not over any lake, but clearly taken from a vineyard terrace I had seen at Horizon. She hadn't even bothered to find a convincing stock photo. The casual carelessness of the lie stung more than elaborate deception would have. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop and booked a tour at Horizon Vineyards for the following day, using a variation of my name. Aaron Mitchell instead of Aaron Malik, close enough that I wouldn't forget to answer to it, different enough to avoid raising suspicion if Rhodes had heard my name. I also purchased a small camera with recording capabilities from a nearby electronics store. Not for blackmail or revenge, but because I knew my own tendency to doubt my perceptions, to rationalize away uncomfortable truths. This time, I needed evidence that even I couldn't dismiss. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake replaying memories of my marriage, searching for the moment when things began to change. Had it been my frequent absences? My emotional unavailability when present? Or had Nadine simply grown tired of the life we had built together? Tomorrow would bring answers, but I already suspected they wouldn't provide the closure I sought. Morning arrived with uncomfortable clarity, the California sunshine streaming through my hotel window with inappropriate cheerfulness. I prepared methodically for the day ahead, dressing in clothes that would help me blend in with other tourists: khaki shorts, a button-down shirt I rarely wore, and sunglasses to partially obscure my face. The camera I had purchased rested in my pocket, small enough to be inconspicuous yet powerful enough to capture what I needed. The tour at Horizon Vineyards was scheduled for 11, which gave me time to rehearse my approach. I would maintain a low profile, ask generic questions about winemaking, and observe Rhodes in his natural environment. Understanding my adversary seemed crucial, though I hesitated to frame him that way. After all, he owed me no loyalty. Nadine was the one who had made promises she apparently couldn't keep. When I arrived at the vineyard, Rhodes himself greeted the tour group at the entrance. Seeing him up close intensified my unease. He possessed the effortless charisma of someone accustomed to admiration, his weathered good looks and confident demeanor creating an immediate impression. He introduced himself with practiced humility, telling the story of how he had transformed from firefighter to vintner after an injury redirected his life. The group responded with appreciative murmurs, particularly the women, who seemed captivated by his rugged authenticity. "Wine isn't just about taste," Rhodes explained as he led us through rows of grapevines. "It's about experience, connection, awakening parts of yourself you've forgotten." His gaze swept across the group, momentarily resting on me before moving on without recognition. Each bottle tells a story of transformation, of grapes becoming something more complex, more alive. The tour progressed through various stages of winemaking, with Rhodes demonstrating impressive knowledge of his craft. Despite my situation, I found myself interested in the process, appreciating the precision and patience required. Throughout the tour, I activated the camera discreetly at intervals, capturing Rhodes's mannerisms, his interactions with others, the environment Nadine had chosen over our life together. During the tasting portion, Rhodes moved from person to person, offering personalized observations about their preferences. When he reached me, I tensed involuntarily. "You have a discerning palate, Mr. Mitchell," he commented, noting how I had evaluated the wine. "You appreciate subtlety." "I appreciate honesty," I responded, maintaining eye contact. "In wine and everything else." Something flickered across his expression, not recognition, but perhaps awareness of an undercurrent in my words. "Honesty can be subjective," he countered smoothly. "What looks like deception might actually be someone's authentic truth finally emerging." The philosophical debate might have continued, but he was called away by another guest. I watched him move through the room with practiced ease, wondering if Nadine would appear. She didn't, which suggested they maintained some discretion about their relationship, at least during business hours. After the tour concluded, I lingered on the property, supposedly admiring the views but actually awaiting an opportunity to observe Rhodes in an unguarded moment. My patience was rewarded when I spotted him leaving the main building and heading toward a small cottage partially hidden by olive trees. Following at a distance, I watched him enter, then positioned myself where I could observe the entrance without being seen. 30 minutes later, a familiar car approached Nadine's rental. My heartbeat accelerated as she parked and walked quickly to the cottage door, which opened before she could knock. Rhodes pulled her inside with evident eagerness, the door closing firmly behind them. I activated the camera one final time, recording the exterior of the cottage, the two cars parked nearby, establishing the irrefutable fact of their meeting. Then I returned to my rental car and drove back to my hotel, emotions churning beneath my composed exterior. That evening, I called Nadine. She answered on the third ring, her voice carefully casual. "How's the lake?" I asked, equally casual. "Beautiful," she replied without hesitation. "We went hiking today along the shoreline." "Sounds nice," I said, picturing her not beside any lake but in Rhodes's cottage, wrapped in his attention. "When do you head back?" "Tomorrow afternoon. My flight lands at 8. Another lie delivered with practiced ease. Perfect timing. "I'll be home." The conversation continued briefly, filled with meaningless pleasantries and careful evasions on both sides. After hanging up, I booked a flight back to Boston that would arrive before her, arranged for the rental car return, and packed my few belongings. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, but tonight I needed to prepare myself emotionally for what lay ahead. The evidence was undeniable, the betrayal complete. All that remained was to decide what kind of man I would be in response, the passive, accommodating husband I had been, or someone with enough self-respect to acknowledge when something was irreparably broken. Our apartment felt different when I returned, smaller somehow, as if the walls had contracted during my absence. Everything remained exactly where it had been before I left, yet nothing felt the same. I moved through the rooms with heightened awareness, noticing details that had previously escaped my attention, Nadine's perfume lingering in the air, photographs chronicling our relationship displayed prominently on shelves, wedding mementos preserved like museum artifacts of a civilization long extinct. While waiting for Nadine's arrival, I transferred the footage from my camera to my laptop, organizing the evidence methodically. Each video clip represented another nail in the coffin of our marriage, another confirmation that what I had witnessed was neither misunderstanding nor coincidence. The images played across my screen with clarity: Rhodes and Nadine together, their body language speaking volumes, their secret cottage rendezvous removing any possibility of innocent explanation. Rather than immediate confrontation upon her return, I decided on a more measured approach. My professional life had taught me that timing and preparation determine outcomes more than emotional intensity. I waited until the following evening, after Nadine had unpacked and settled back into our shared space, maintaining the charade of normalcy with remarkable composure. She recounted fabricated stories about the lake house, described hikes that never happened, and shared photos carefully selected to support her narrative, some actually taken at lakes during previous trips, recycled to maintain her deception. I suggested dinner on our balcony, her favorite spot in our apartment with its view of the Boston skyline. The evening air carried the promise of approaching summer, and the setting sun bathed everything in golden light, a perfect backdrop for the dissolution of illusions. Nadine seemed pleased by the suggestion, perhaps interpreting it as a gesture of reconnection. She changed into a sundress similar to the one she had worn at the vineyard and joined me as I arranged plates and opened wine. "This is nice," she commented, settling into her chair. "We should do this more often." "We should," I agreed, pouring her a glass of California Red, a deliberate choice that didn't escape her notice. "Since when do you drink red wine?" she asked, a barely perceptible tension entering her voice. "I've been expanding my horizons," I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "Learning about new things, discovering hidden aspects of myself. You could say I've developed quite an interest in winemaking recently." Her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the stem of her glass. "What brought this on?" "Inspiration from unexpected places," I said, retrieving my laptop from inside and placing it on the table between us. "I saw you with him, Nadine. Not just that you were with him, but how you were with him." The color drained from her face as understanding dawned. "Aaron, I can explain. I was at Horizon Vineyards," I continued calmly, opening the laptop to display a paused video. "I took the tour. Met Sebastian Rhodes. Recorded everything. Her breath caught audibly. You followed me? Spied on me? I discovered the truth, I corrected, my voice remaining steady despite the turmoil beneath. There's a difference. This isn't what it looks like, she attempted, though her expression betrayed resignation. It looks exactly like what it is, I responded, playing a clip that showed her entering Rhodes's cottage. You've been living a double life, and I've been too absent to notice until now. Tears formed in her eyes, whether from genuine remorse or from being discovered remained unclear. You left me alone for years, Aaron. I was your layover, a place to rest between flights to somewhere more important. Her words struck with unexpected force, containing painful kernels of truth despite their self-serving nature. My professional dedication had indeed created a void in our relationship, one that Rhodes had apparently filled. Nevertheless, understanding didn't equate to absolution. You could have talked to me, I said, my composure finally beginning to fracture. You could have demanded changes, issued ultimatums, even filed for divorce. Anything would have been more honorable than this elaborate deception. Would you have listened? She challenged, wiping away tears. Really listened, not just nodded while mentally reviewing flight schedules? Instead of answering directly, I revealed the videos I had compiled, not explicit or invasive, but undeniable documentation of her betrayal. I had edited the footage into a simple montage, clips of her and Rhodes at the vineyard, intercut with photos from our wedding day and happier times in our marriage. The contrast spoke volumes, highlighting the distance between commitment and current reality. I made this for you, I explained as she watched, transfixed by the visual representation of her duplicity. Not for revenge, but for clarity. I wanted you to see what I saw, the woman who promised forever finding fulfillment elsewhere. When the video ended, Nadine remained silent for several moments before speaking. What happens now? That depends, I replied, closing the laptop. On whether there's anything left between us worth salvaging, or if we've simply been going through motions neither of us truly feels anymore. The week following our confrontation passed in a haze of stilted conversations and careful avoidance. Nadine and I occupied the same physical space while existing in entirely separate emotional realms. She continued going to work, maintaining appearances, while I requested temporary leave from the airline, the first time in my career I had prioritized personal matters over professional obligations. The apartment became a negotiated territory, divided by unspoken boundaries neither of us dared to cross. Initially, Nadine attempted justifications, her loneliness during my absences, her unmet emotional needs, her gradual disconnection from our shared life. These explanations emerged fragmented between long silences, neither of us possessing adequate language for the situation. Eventually, she stopped trying to explain and simply acknowledged what we both already knew: our marriage had become a hollow vessel, a container without substance. By mutual agreement rather than dramatic declaration, she packed essential belongings and relocated temporarily to a friend's apartment, her actual friend this time, not the fabricated cover for her escapades with Rhodes. Communications became practical arrangements through text messages, discussions about bills and schedules utterly devoid of emotional content. The distance provided necessary space for reflection, forcing me to consider questions I had long avoided. What did I truly want from life? What kind of relationship deserved my investment? Who was I beyond my professional identity? After 10 days of separation, we arranged to meet at Logan Airport, neutral territory that nevertheless represented the central conflict of our relationship. My frequent departures, my comfort with transience, my tendency to escape into work rather than address domestic complexities. The terminal bustled with travelers rushing toward connections or reunions, their purposeful movements contrasting with our stationary uncertainty. Nadine found me sitting alone near Gate C12, reading a technical manual without absorbing the content. She appeared worn down, her typically immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, dark circles visible beneath her eyes despite careful makeup application. Something about her vulnerability sparked unexpected compassion within me, a reminder that pain rarely confines itself to innocent parties. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, settling into the seat beside mine without reaching for physical contact. "Seemed appropriate," I replied, gesturing toward the departing planes visible through expansive windows. "This is where everything started falling apart, isn't it? Me always leaving, you always waiting." It wasn't just that, she said, her voice steady despite evident emotion. We both stopped being present long before you noticed my absence. I just found somewhere else to be while you remained dedicated to everything except our relationship. Her assessment stung precisely because it contained truth. My professional dedication had indeed created distance, though it hardly justified her response. We sat in silence for several moments, watching aircraft taxi across tarmac under threatening skies, a meteorological reflection of our emotional landscape. Do you hate me? She finally asked, echoing the question from the outline of our confrontation that had provided unexpected structure to the chaotic dissolution of our marriage. No, I answered truthfully after careful consideration. I just stopped loving the version of you that forgot who I was. And I finally remembered who I am. Tears formed in her eyes, not the manipulative kind designed to elicit sympathy but genuine expressions of recognition. Who are you, Aaron? I'm not sure I ever really knew. The question resonated more deeply than she likely intended, encapsulating the journey of self-discovery catalyzed by her betrayal. Someone who deserves more than conditional loyalty. Someone willing to rebuild a life around authentic connections rather than comfortable arrangements. Someone who won't abandon himself to preserve artificial stability. What happens now? She asked, unconsciously echoing her question from our balcony confrontation. I reached into my jacket pocket and removed an envelope containing airline tickets and legal documents. 2 options. A round-trip ticket to wherever you need to go to figure things out, or one-way passage to your new life with appropriate financial arrangements to facilitate transition. Either way, I won't be your passenger anymore. Her hand trembled slightly as she accepted the envelope without immediately examining its contents. And what about you? Where will you go? Somewhere I can see clearly, I replied, feeling unexpected lightness despite the gravity of our situation. I've applied for instructor certification. Thinking about opening a flight school somewhere with fewer clouds. Oregon, she said quietly, surprising me with her recall of conversations from years earlier when I had mentioned dreams beyond commercial aviation. You always talked about Oregon. We remained together at the gate until her departure was announced, 2 people sharing memories of a relationship already transforming into past tense. When she finally stood to leave, our farewell lacked dramatic flourishes, no desperate embraces or passionate recriminations, just the quiet acknowledgement of completion. Clear skies, Aaron, she said, offering a sad smile before turning toward her gate. Clear skies, I echoed, watching her walk away with measured steps, her figure gradually disappearing among other travelers pursuing their separate journeys through the terminal's controlled chaos. Oregon welcomed me with landscapes that matched my evolving internal topography, expansive skies above rolling terrain, mountains that commanded respect without demanding conquest, forests that offered both solitude and connection. After finalizing the divorce with minimal acrimony, I invested my savings and settlement in a modest property outside Bend, converting a former crop dusting operation into a flight school that specialized in instruction for recreational pilots. The transition from international routes to local skies represented more than professional redirection, it symbolized my commitment to remaining present rather than perpetually departing. The first year passed in productive isolation as I established both business foundations and personal boundaries. My schedule became deliberately measured, structured enough to provide stability yet flexible enough to accommodate spontaneity. The constant pressure of commercial deadlines yielded to a rhythm dictated by weather patterns and student progress rather than corporate demands. Weather became something to experience rather than merely navigate, each meteorological shift offering lessons about adaptation and patience that extended beyond aviation. Occasional updates about Nadine reached me through mutual acquaintances. She had accepted the one-way ticket option, relocating permanently to California where she eventually secured a position managing public relations for a consortium of independent wineries. The information arrived without emotional turbulence, her choices registering as neutral facts rather than painful provocations. Whether her relationship with Rhodes continued remained unknown and increasingly irrelevant to my reconstructed existence. My blog, initially created as private therapeutic exercise, gradually attracted a modest following among aviation enthusiasts and fellow pilots. Clear Skies, No Passengers chronicled not just technical aspects of flying but philosophical reflections on navigation through both literal and metaphorical atmospheres. Writing became another form of instruction, teaching myself through articulation what experience had already begun imparting through less structured channels. During the second year, my deliberate solitude softened into selective sociability. Local connections formed naturally through business interactions and community involvement, creating a network distinct from the transient associations of my previous career. These relationships developed without pressured expectations, each proceeding at appropriate velocity determined by mutual comfort rather than predetermined timelines. The most significant lesson emerged gradually: betrayal had functioned as unfortunate but effective catalyst rather than terminal destination. Nadine's infidelity, while painful, had ultimately redirected me toward authentic living rather than merely existing within parameters established by external expectations. The professional excellence that once consumed my identity became properly contextualized, an important component rather than defining characteristic of selfhood. On the anniversary of discovering the vineyard brochure, I took a solo flight at dawn, climbing through morning mist into pristine airspace above the Cascade Range. Banking gently between cloud formations, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this particular intersection of time and space. The navigational metaphors seemed especially apt: departure points, routes adjusted for changing conditions, instruments consulted but intuition equally valued. Upon landing, I found an unexpected email from Nadine in my inbox, the first direct communication since our airport farewell. Her message contained neither attempts at reconciliation nor requests for forgiveness, simply acknowledgement of parallel healing and gratitude for the clean separation that had allowed respective recoveries. She mentioned reading my blog occasionally, recognizing evolution in my written voice that mirrored her own personal development. The final paragraph conveyed something approaching wisdom. Sometimes I wonder who we might have become if we had recognized earlier what we ultimately learned through painful separation. Perhaps we needed to break apart to become complete individuals. I hope your skies remain clear, Aaron, and that you continue finding yourself in the journey. I composed a brief, genuine response affirming her insights without reopening closed chapters. Our interaction concluded with mutual recognition rather than regret, an exchange between two people who had survived relationship extinction and emerged as more authentic versions of themselves through the process. The flight school continued prospering through focused effort and authentic engagement rather than driven ambition. Students responded to instruction methods that emphasized understanding over memorization, encouraging them to develop relationships with aircraft and environments rather than merely manipulating controls. Teaching others to navigate physical airspace simultaneously reinforced my navigation through emotional atmospheres, creating reciprocal growth that benefited everyone involved. Evening flights became personal ritual, solo journeys during that transitional period when daylight surrenders to darkness, when instruments gradually replace visual references. During these contemplative ascents, clarity consistently emerged. Some betrayals serve as necessary disruptions, forcing recalibration toward more authentic existence. The woman I had loved had inadvertently given me the opportunity to remember myself, to recognize the difference between flying others to their destinations and charting my own course through both crowded airspace and internal wilderness. Transformation emerged not through dramatic reinvention but through deliberate reclamation of qualities and aspirations previously subordinated to relationship convenience. The pilot who had lost himself while navigating everyone else's journeys finally redirected attention toward his own heading, discovering that the most important flight path had always been internal, from unconscious accommodation toward conscious authenticity.